You are not prepared. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? The Burning Crusade is coming, and you are undecided of your main class. I can't really say that I blame you. I'm sure many of you have played Vanilla Classic, and you'd of course know that the classes are much more clear-cut. You want a tank, you pick a warrior. You want to be the best healer, roll a priest. Best DPS, warrior. Smallest wiener size, mage. Over a year ago, I helped guide you in your class choice for Vanilla Classic, and many people have requested the same thing for BC, so I've returned now at the turn of the tides. I'll tell you right now though, it'll be a tougher choice. These classes all have roles as they do in Vanilla, but it's not as extreme, and the disparities between them are lessened. Now, there's not a clear-cut winner for tanking or healing or whatever. There are no more, quote, useless specs that have been weaned out of the meta in Vanilla, and not just through damage, healing, or damage mitigation. As you'll see, there are a bunch of these little buffs and debuffs that warrants bringing at least one of these specs along to the raid usually. They're all still unique in their own right, but they're much more competitive. Those disappointed that Shadow Priest didn't see much use in Vanilla Classic raiding will rejoice in the fact that they're quite important for BC. Hunters have their time in the spotlight, and those upset at the overpowered nature of bullshit Frost Mages will be just as upset because honestly, they're pretty crazy in BC too. When people think the Burning Crusade, they think of hallmark features such as arena, jewel crafting, and heroics, when in reality, if you had to pick the biggest change, it would probably be how these classes evolved. And my goal in this video is to explain to you in what ways they have, what they excel at, and so on. It's still the early stages of MMO design. As you'll see, there's still a lot of one-button classes in PvE, but still, lots of evolution across the board. Something we have to address first though, and I'll mention this throughout the video, is that these classes are heavily affected by some of the more broad sweeping changes to the PvE and PvP scene in BC. For example, the raids are reduced to 25 man, and debuff slots are increased from 16 to 40, therefore you have much more freedom in applying debuffs and dots to bosses. Anyone who's raided in Vanilla knows that Hunters don't want to use Serpent Sting, Shadow Priests don't want to use Shadow Word Pain, and certain items are frowned upon because they take critical debuff slots. So, due to this decreased raid size and increased debuff cap, you have way more freedom to actually play your class in BC. This opens up the door to Warlocks using dots, Feral Druids using bleeds, and much more. And speaking of freedom, you see support for each spec not only through class balance, but also through itemization. Those who played Vanilla know that the armor sets were all designed for just one spec per class. For example, every tier set for warriors was designed around tanking, and DPS warriors had to get a random mishmash of offset pieces to support their playstyle. It was the Burning Crusade is when they added multiple versions of tier sets for each and every spec, providing the appropriate stats and also set bonuses for both PvE and PvP. In the raiding scene, melee in general have a tougher time as they have more cleaves and AoEs to dodge. I think this has always been the case with the game to some extent, but BC has the reputation of being pretty unfriendly to melee classes in particular, so something to keep in mind there. World buffs are nerfed. The meta in Classic Vanilla changes with world buffs. For example, Hunters would be much better in comparison if the world buff meta didn't exist, because they don't benefit as much from them. They're gone in BC though, with the exception of one, which is huge in the realm of class balance. Shaman is now playable by the Alliance, and Paladin by Horde, so if you wrote those classes off because you're a faction-first kind of player, they're now worth exploring. And on the PvP side of things, Arena is the new endgame competitive PvP activity. So you're going from these wide-open battlegrounds to enclosed arenas with line of sight everywhere, which has a huge effect. For example, Hunters not being as strong as they were in Vanilla in this aspect being one of them. In an open field, Hunters and the Dothraki can 1v1 just about anyone, so it's a much different story in an arena setting. Crowd control effects were nerfed to last no longer than 12 seconds, so say so long to mages being able to indefinitely reset fights, or grabbing a beer when you're getting chain sapped. Classes that used to rely solely on burst aren't as godlike with the advent of the resilience stat, and much more. Again, I'll take notes of all of this when the time is right, but I just wanted to mention all of this now to get you in that mindset that it's not just your class that's changing, but it's also the environment around you, and I'd argue that's just as important as the classes themselves. For the sake of keeping the length of this video down, if you're curious about PvE rotations or PvP gameplay, I'll have some nice examples of both in the description for each class and spec. May as well see those in action, right? So definitely check them out. hunter is the master of the wilds and isn't shy of exploring the unknown of the outland. Of course, with the trusty companion by their side. As you'd expect, they have a focus on dealing out range damage, and that's where they're the most comfortable, but they can hold their own face-to-face if it comes to it. They're one of 2 classes to have direct control over a companion pet, with hundreds of families or variations to tame out in the wild. And aside from their powerful ranged attacks, they have a selection of traps to damage, slow, weaken, or otherwise debilitate anyone or anything unfortunate enough to spring them. They're arguably the masters of kiting in the Burning Crusade, and fighting against them is like chasing the greased-up deaf guy. The Beast Mastery tree focuses on improving the combat capabilities of your pet and is far more powerful in the expansion. Marksmanship holds powerful ranged attacks, and Survival, aptly named, increases your survivability and also utility and support to teammates. They received some updates to core functionality, such as their dead zone. This will largely depend on how Blizzard does BC Classic, as this was in patch 2.3, but the Hunter's dead zone was nearly eliminated. As you may know, in Vanilla, if enemies get too close to you, you're unable to shoot or use most ranged abilities as they have a minimum range. And of course, there's a maximum range to your melee abilities, so you have this gap where you can't melee nor shoot. This is called the dead zone, and keeping enemies out of it is delicate and often difficult to do. In the Burning Crusade, however, it's removed since the minimum range for shooting has been drastically reduced, giving them much more freedom than their vanilla counterparts. Traps are now usable in combat, which is huge. It makes for a much more fluid gameplay style, and as a result, you'll be using them far more often compared to your past self in vanilla. With new lands comes new wildlife, and Outland offers a wide variety of new companions waiting to be tamed. They now receive a percentage of the hunter's armor, attack power, stamina, and so on, covering up a major weak spot in vanilla of pets not scaling with you as you gear up. Ravagers are highly sought after for PvE DPS. Warp Stalkers have increased mobility with their warp skill, and much more. Plenty of variety and different looks to choose from in the Outland. Can you become the next Pokemon Master? A pet peeve of yours during vanilla may be the fragility of your companion, whether it be from PvE or PvP, as they die quite quickly to incidental AoE damage. You'll be happy to know that one of the many new pet talents is Avoidance, which decreases area of effect damage taken by 50%. They're not immortal, and you still have to keep an eye on them, but overall, a huge improvement in survivability. For ability roll call, first up we have Steady Shot. Hunter gameplay and rotations in the PvE scene in vanilla can be described as being pretty stagnant. Unlike many other classes, they have no filler spell, and their gameplay boils down to auto-shooting until arcane, aimed, or multi-shot come up, depending on your situation, build, or activity. This changed in the Burning Crusade with the addition of Steady Shot, which has no cooldown, and after a short cast, deals moderate damage to an enemy, more so if dazed. Today, this ability is quite well known because, due to its 20% scaling with ranged attack power, it outpaced nearly every other hunter ability, and top PvE DPS hunters would weave it into this macro along with Kill Command, and use this exclusively as their PvE DPS rotation, using the term lightly there. It ended up being a DPS loss to use anything other than this macro, in fact. Of course, excluding your big rapid fire and bestial wrath cooldowns and trinkets. I mentioned Kill Command already, so let's cover that. This is an ability that you use to command your pet to deal some damage, only usable after a critical strike by the hunter, with a short cooldown. Mana was also an issue for hunters in vanilla. I just said that the gameplay for hunters is auto-shooting until your abilities are on cooldown, but if you were to do that, you'd find yourself out of mana quite quickly. This was addressed in BC with the new aspect of the Viper, which over time restores mana, becoming more potent the lower mana you are. And many people are surprised to learn that misdirection was in the game as early as the Burning Crusade. This causes the threat generated from your next few attacks to stick to a friendly raid or party member, which is a huge help. Many classes actually got some sort of ability or passive to help keep their threat down in BC. This is one of them. Overall, threat is still a big deal in BC. I think it was Wrath is when tanks started getting it pretty easily, but BC is still tricky, and hunters bring very high value with misdirect here, and they'll want to use it on cooldown. Your trap repertoire has been expanded with the addition of Snake Trap, which spawns several snakes to attack whoever broke it. They're not really damaging, but they do apply some hindering poisons such as crippling to slow, mind-numbing for cast speed, and deadly for damage. Moving into talents here, I won't really go over all of them because I want this to be a general overview, but I will cover the new abilities and the major stuff. First is Ferocious Inspiration, which gives your party a damage buff after your pet scores a critical hit. This is one of the many little buffs that many specs bring, as you'll see. Blizzard wanted a more even representation of the specs across the board, and they didn't do this just by increasing the damage or covering weak spots. They did this by giving various party buffs, so inevitably when some specs would fall behind, there's always a reason to bring them. People describe this as bring the class, not the player, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is really up to your preference. But moving on, in Beast Mastery, you gain the Beast Within. It basically copies your Bestial Wrath effect onto the Hunter, increasing damage, reducing mana cost, and making you immune to crowd control. Marksmanship Hunters gain Silencing Shot. In Vanilla, they lacked any sort of way to interrupt casters, excluding Scatter and Intimidation, so this covers up a weak spot, obviously PvP oriented here. And Survival get Readiness, which instantly resets the cooldown of all other Hunter abilities, sort of like the Rogue's Preparation. So Rapid Fire, Feign Death, Traps, everything. Survival also gets a crucial supporting debuff called Expose Weakness, which causes your crits to increase the attack power of all raid members by a portion of your agility, and many raids would run one Survival Hunter for this debuff alone. Overall, Hunters are very well represented in the Burning Crusade. You may have heard from many that they're one of the top DPSers. Their Beast Mastery spec shines through in PvE content, making use of that steady shot macro as described earlier. Some will say simple, others boring, but nonetheless, very powerful. Survival is also important. It's not as potent as Beastmaster, but that debuff brings valuable support, and they'll always be wanted for that. And Marksman Hunters will find their niche in PvP due to their high burst damage and added control, although that won't be the only spec that you see in Arena. But overall, the Hunter becomes much more versatile in the Burning Crusade. A lot of that clunkiness was washed away. Sometimes it feels like you have concrete shoes, with traps not usable in combat, or the extreme dead zone and pet fragility, and players who wrote them off because of these things may want to give them a second look in the Burning Crusade. Extremely powerful in PvE, very capable in PvP. Regardless of your preferences, an appealing choice to be sure.
War. War never changes. Since the dawn of humankind, when our ancestors first discovered the killing power of rock and bone, blood has been spilled in the name of everything from God to justice to simple psychotic rage.
War never changes. But Warrior, on the other hand, does quite a bit in the Burning Crusade. They're still the plate-wearing juggernauts you've come to know and love. Sometimes it just feels good to hit things. I feel like a description of the Warrior class is pretty unneeded. They're the most straightforward archetype in any RPG. You wear heavy armor, wield big weapons, and beat people into a pulp until they rage log a level 1 alt to shit-talk you. I guess maybe if you're new to the game though, in World of Warcraft, they operate on the rage system. You generate rage as you hit enemies and get hit by them, and you then use this resource to power your many melee attacks. What weapons you use and how you use them, however, depends on your specialization. Their arms tree remains to be their PvP tree, with a focus on improving their two-handed capabilities, as well as some debilitating effects for PvP, although they do become valuable in PvE as well, as you'll see. Fury still prefers a dual-wielding playstyle and is the go-to for those who prefer PvE content, and Protection of course bolsters their defense, and although there are up-and-comers in the tanking realm in BC, Protection warriors are often seen to hold the crown of being the best single-target tank with their wide variety of defensive-based cooldowns. For ability roll call, first up we have Victory Rush. Anytime you score a killing blow, you get some free, rageless damage to keep the kill streak going, but do note that this is before it healed them in any way. Warrior Mobility sees an overall upgrade with the addition of the Intervene spell, which allows you to charge towards an ally and take the damage and effect of the next hostile action towards them. Mobility-wise, this is crucial for quick escapes or closing the gap if an ally is positioned favorably near an enemy, and for the most sharp, if timed correctly, can be used to take critical abilities such as Kidney Shot to name just one. Warriors who've been bullied relentlessly by coward 2-button frost mages will generate more real-life rage to learn that it's still pretty much the case in BC. but you can at least hit one button now instead of just AFKing to wait for your inevitable demise. And that's Spell Reflect. Only usable with the shield, this will reflect one spell cast on you within the next 5 seconds, with just a 10-second cooldown, which is pretty crazy. It gives them some way to defend themselves against spellcasters of any kind. Our pea-sized brains are strained with the addition of a new shout. Commanding Shout gives you the option of increased health, but you must choose this or Battle Shout, not both. Unless you have 2 warriors in the party, of course. Talent-specific abilities include Rampage for Fury, which after scoring a critical hit, allows you to stack attack power for 30 seconds. Arms Warriors, on the other hand, don't get a new ability, unless you count Death Wish being moved from the Fury tree, but they do get the important Blood Frenzy talent, which gives your bleeds a raid-wide 4% increased physical damage taken by the enemy, so it's never a bad idea to have an Arms Warrior in raid for this alone. Another important one to mention is Mace specialization. The Burning Crusade is when warriors became infamous for their mace stun. This talent received a buff, and it procs all the time. And looking up old warrior arena videos in Burning Crusade, usually they'll be using a mace because it's just stupidly good. And protection warriors get Devastate, which deals some damage and stacks as under armor. Tanking in vanilla boils down to Bloodthirst on cooldown, assuming Fury Prod here, and then Revenge when it's up, Heroic Strike for Rage Dump, and either Sunder Armor or Battle Shout as filler. This is a game changer because it's an actual damaging, no cooldown ability that you can use between revenges, making it feel like you're doing more than just holding threat, and it makes tanking feel a little bit less awkward. Combine this with the huge buff to shield slam damage, and also general increased boss damage, the Sword and Board takes the crown back from Fury Prod as the tanking spec in BC. Warriors grow a lot in the Burning Crusade. A lot of what they lack in vanilla seems to get addressed, with the biggest being mobility with Intervene, Spell Reflect to help them against casters, and some serious self-healing through Second Wind, which is going to be a must for any PvPer. Tanking feels really nice with the addition of an actual damaging skill with no cooldown. They do very well in PvE. In PvP, they're still kings due to their burst and the healing debuff from Mortal Strike that's still unique to them. And tanking, they're as good as ever. They're represented well in just about every role that they are intended to fill, and are a very good choice for players who want to strive in both PvP and PvE, DPS or tanking. The Masters of Arcane, Frost, and Fire. Mobility, crowd control, damage, utility, defense, AoE, single target. The mage seems to adapt to just about any situation before them, and you'll never find someone saying, nah, don't take a mage, they suck. The spellcaster archetype is as old as the fantasy genre, and in World of Warcraft they have a focus on 3 schools of magic: Fire, Frost, and Arcane, and each have their own unique effects and playstyle. And aside from being heavy damage dealers, they also bring great support to allies through the use of buffs, crowd control effects, conjured food and water, and portals to major cities, and throughout vanilla, due to all of this, they're one of the most prolific classes. Whether you choose to control and freeze your enemies through the PvP-oriented Frost Tree, or nuke through raids through the power of Fire and Arcane, they just always seem to be amazing in any expansion for both PvE and PvP, and the same is true for the Burning Crusade. Spell Steal will take a beneficial magic effect on an enemy and put it on yourself for 2 minutes maximum, no cooldown. This turns mages into super dispellers, and its uses for PvE and PvP are obvious. Steal a Paladin Bop, powerful damage buffs, druid heals, enemy mage absorbs. It's insane. They also get the invisibility spell. It works as a pseudo-stealth. It removes you from combat and makes you invisible to enemies, and you can only see other invisible mages. This is one of the many threat drops added to the game that I mentioned earlier. Vending machines will rejoice to learn that the Burning Crusade is when they get the refreshment table. That's right, no more handing out food and water one by one to a full raid. Simply have 2 other players there to help you summon the table, and they can take what they want. Molten Armor is a new buff that increases your crit, reduces your chance to be crit, and deals some damage to attackers. You of course have to choose between this and your other armor spells. Those who love the arcane fantasy of mages have their time to shine in the Burning Crusade with the new Arcane Blast spell. Although the Arcane Tree does see much use in Vanilla Classic, it's used more as a support for Fire and Frost abilities really, and Arcane Missiles, the intended damage spell for the tree, hardly sees any use at all. Arcane Blast, on the other hand, is very powerful. Each time you use it, it has a reduced cast time, but increased mana cost, so it's a mana hog, and you have to be careful not to go too overboard. Ice Lance makes its debut in BC, dealing very minimal damage baseline, but increased threefold against frozen targets. This, combined with Shatter, gives incredible burst, and with its 30-yard range, replaces Cone of Cold in that Shatter combo. In vanilla, Frost Mages are incredibly bursty, but a downside is that they must stay stationary to get that damage, or expose themselves with Cone of Cold. Having a 30-yard range instant cast spell gives more mobility to a class that already excels in kiting, which is particularly deadly even more so when you consider the Water Elemental. This can be obtained at the end of the Frost Tree. It's a pet that'll not only attack your target, but also give you a ranged Frost Nova on a 25-second cooldown. So combine all of this with Spell Steal, Invisibility, Ice Lance, and High Burst. Frost Mages grow even stronger than they once were in Vanilla Classic, which is hard to believe and pisses me off because I'm a warrior. Icy Veins is a DPS cooldown for Frost Mages, only added in patch 2.3, granting casting speed and preventing pushback for 20 seconds. So another ability that may or may not be in the game at release, depending on how they do TBC Classic. Arcane Mages find the Slow talent in their tree, which works in 3 parts: reduced movement speed, casting speed, and increases the time between attacks by 50% with no cooldown. Fire Mages get a bit more control with Dragon's Breath. As you may know, this is the glass cannon spec in vanilla. Full on damage, but if people catch you, you're pretty much a goner. This deals some damage and disorients enemies in a cone area to give you a bit more CC to a spec that's starved of CC. Overall, the mage just categorically improves in just about every aspect in both PvE and PvP. PvP in particular with some added danger and utility with Spell Steal, and more damage on the move with Ice Lance, control with the Water Elemental, and slipperiness with Invisibility. Fire and Arcane are the PvE specs, with Arcane taking over when they get their tier 5 bonus, and Frost, as explained, is unmatched for PvP. It's still pretty clear-cut what specializations you'll follow for certain activities, and there's not a lot of crossover on either side. Regardless, the mage is still as strong as ever, and you really can't go wrong in PvE or PvP. The power of Christ compels you to like this video if you're enjoying it so far. The first healer on our list, of course, has to be the priest. Instead of weaving spells of Frost, Fire, and Arcane to tear apart enemies, they hold a wide variety of holy spells to replenish allies. They're not left defenseless though, and have a selection of offensive holy and shadow spells to protect themselves. They have the reputation of having the most diverse toolkit out of any healer. Absorbs, heals over time, group heals, quick heals, big heals, and powerful buffs makes them adapt to just about any situation. And let's not forget those who dabble in the dark side and weave spells of shadow instead of healing. A mixture of damage over time effects, debuffs, and bursty damage spells makes them quite dangerous in PvE and PvP, all the while still being able to pop out and throw out some heals in a pinch. Just about the only thing that a mage can't do. Holy is your straight healing specialization, which sole purpose is to increase raw healing throughput and mana returns. Discipline is more of a supportive tree, housing many crucial buffs and improving the priest's defense, making them more appealing in the realm of PvP. And Shadow, as described, forsakes light for Shadow, and its wielders have an extensive collection of Linkin Park albums. Mass Dispel is the first new ability on our list, removing one beneficial magic effect from enemies and one harmful magic effect on allies within a large radius, even being strong enough to pop immunities such as Paladin Bubbles or Mage Ice Blocks. Fear Ward, formerly exclusive to dwarves, is now baseline for every priest of both factions. Of course, making the target immune to the next fear spell, this was seen to be too important to be restricted to just one race, so I guess screw you to all of the dwarves out there. Prayer of Mending is a buff that you apply to a target, and upon that target taking damage, they're instantly healed, and the spell bounces to another raid member at random, up to a maximum of 5 times. Binding Heal is a low-threat flash heal for yourself and your target, having quite a high mana cost. And Shadow Fiend makes its debut. When used, you summon a Shadow Fiend to attack your target, and it restores mana to the priest with each hit. They also receive the powerful Shadow Word Death, which is their execute. It's instant heavy shadow damage, only usable on targets below 20% health. Pain Suppression is a talent that's found in the Discipline tree, reducing damage taken by the target, and also increasing dispel resistance. And an important passive they have is their improved Divine Spirit talent, which gives some extra spell power based on the target's spirit stat. Most raids will run one Discipline Priest for that alone. And we have Circle of Healing, which is exclusive to Holy Priests, and it's an instant cast heal to a target and all nearby party members, which is spammable, but you will run into mana issues. Lastly, Vampiric Touch is exclusive to Shadow Priests. It's a new damage over time that also debuffs the target, giving mana regeneration to the priest and all party members based on shadow damage. It's extremely important, and along with their Shadow Weaving debuff, which causes your target to take 10% increased shadow damage at 5 stacks, and Misery, which is 5% for all spells, Shadow Priests become crucial in every raid tier in the Burning Crusade due to the added support. If you've ever heard the term Mana Battery before, it's probably referring to Shadow Priests. They're as strong as ever, with Holy being the main PvE healing spec, whereas Discipline brings that support, and outside of that favors PvP-oriented players due to its defensive capabilities. Shadow, as described, is great in PvE due to its support, still dealing decent damage. In PvP it's kind of hit or miss. You still don't have dispersion, nor any movement increases, which leaves you very vulnerable if you get trained. They're dependent on good peelers such as mages or rogues. But on the flip side, they do melt faces, and their silence is untrinketable in BC. 5 seconds of guaranteed no heals with the 45-second cooldown is insane. Also, silence isn't on the DR until Wrath, which is even more broken. So they have potential, you just need to support them. So, the Priest. PvE, PvP, DPS, and healing, they have a lot of tools and are generally in high demand no matter your preference. The Warlock. Our third caster on the list, the Warlock has gained the reputation of being extremely powerful in the Burning Crusade in particular. Whereas the Shadow Priest merely adopted the darkness, the Warlock was shaped by it, molded by it even. Most every spell in the repertoire is of the Shadow Magic school, and their uses vary wildly. Whether it's straightforward damage from the hard-cast Shadow Bolt, your extensive arsenal of damage over time effects, debilitating curses, a wide variety of demons at their command, or even supportive spells such as Healthstone to heal allies, or Soulstone to revive them, or the Ritual of Summoning for transportation, the Warlock is a great combination of support and damage. Their Affliction tree focuses on improving their curses and debilitating effects, with more of a focus on damage over time spells to give their enemies a slow but steady death. Demonology, as the name suggests, improves the various demons that you have at your disposal, and Destruction forgoes utility and defense for all-out damage. One of the many glass cannon specializations in the game, and they could rarely dish it out. Not only do they retain that great utility, but they're nuking machines in PvE and juggernauts in PvP. And you'll see Druid/Warlock in twos so much that you'll want to vomit all over your keyboard. New spells are Seed of Corruption, which deals some damage over time to a target, and explodes for AoE damage after that target takes a certain amount of damage. So a really strong AoE spell here. They also get a new armor called Fel Armor. This changed all over the place over the years, but in BC it increases healing by 20% and increases your spell power. Similar to the Mage table, the Warlocks get the Soul Well, which if you have 2 people help you summon, drops a clickable Soul Well that'll dispense health stones, so no more trading stones out one at a time. Another threat drop is Soul Shatter. One of the issues you may have run into in vanilla was that she had the potential for high damage, but due to threat sometimes you just had to slow down. Soul Shatter is a 5-minute cooldown spell that drops 50% of your aggro to all enemies within 50 yards. Incinerate is a new damage spell, dealing some moderate damage baseline, and some bonus to targets affected by your Immolate dot. And for talents, we have Unstable Affliction for the Affliction tree. This is another dot that deals some moderate damage, and more importantly, some heavy damage and a 5-second silence if it's dispelled. So this gives you some great dispel protection. You load up your target with dots, and then throw this on top of it to protect them. They also get a few key passives for raid support, such as Shadow Embrace, which causes your dots to reduce physical damage done by the target by 5%, and Malediction, which improves your Curse of Elements. Demonology Warlocks get a new demon called the Felguard. This is quite a powerful demon, having the ability to cleave and intercept stun in addition to its high damage. And Destruction Warlocks pick up Shadow Fury, which is an AoE that deals some light damage and stuns all enemies within the reticle for 2 seconds. Affliction is very powerful early on in PvE, not just due to damage, but also those debuffs. They later get overtaken by Destruction though. Due to its fragility, it's mainly a PvE spec, but top tier damage requires top tier gameplay. Get those fingers ready, because your job is to use Curse of Elements and then Shadow Bolt. So they have the BM Hunter syndrome. High damage, but an incredibly simple playstyle. But hey, this is still mid-2000s MMO design. What'd you expect? Demonology has its uses. A unique thing with Warlocks is that they tanked certain fights in the expansion, but overall Demonology went down as being a PvP spec paired with Affliction. You may have heard the term SL/SL Warlocks. This is referring to a talent build that gives you Siphon Life and Soul Link. A combination of steady damage, insane tankiness, and high self-healing makes them very dangerous in PvP. Regardless, you can bet money that they'll be one of the most prolific classes in Arena and BC Classic, just about as much as the Druid. The Jack of all trades and master of none. The first class on our list that's capable of DPS, tanking, and healing is the Druid. The Masters of Nature, they have the ability to shapeshift into different animal forms to suit their needs. They borrow a little bit from every class. Their tank form, which is Bear, operates on the Warrior's Rage system. Their cat form, which is for DPS, operates on the Energy and Combo Point system, which you'll see soon in the Rogue section. And aside from this, they hold a variety of crucial supportive buffs and abilities, such as Innervate for mana regeneration, or Critical Strike to party members. They're still the only class with the ability to resurrect teammates in the midst of combat, and their healing style is unique because it's focused primarily on heal over time effects. The Feral Tree is dual purpose, holding talents that increase both their tanking and DPS capabilities. A benefit from this is that they can switch between both on the fly. Restoration holds a variety of buffs to make you a more powerful healer, and Balance on the other hand is a spellcaster tree, providing boons to arcane and nature damaging spells, even holding its own animal form to improve them further. In vanilla, they were seen to be one of the weakest classes overall. In a community who's obsessed with min-maxing, a class that can do everything but isn't the best at it made them into one of the least represented classes in the game. However, this changes in the Burning Crusade as they become unrivaled in very important aspects, whether it be in the realm of tanking, DPS, or healing, PvE or PvP. One of the reasons for this, at least for healing, is that it was the Burning Crusade is when multiple classes could have heals over time on a target. This is true for any class with HOTS, but I felt it most appropriate to mention in the Druid category because after all, that's their whole niche. They're the heal over time class. So removing this restriction alone was huge for all classes, the Druid even more so. They have a new heal over time called Life Bloom, which also heals instantly at the end of its duration, or if it's dispelled, giving them some more power in PvP, and it's stackable 3 times to increase its potency. The reason why Druids become gods in PvP can be summed down to one spell, and that's Cyclone. Since its implementation, the spell has become iconic of the PvP Druid, and for good reason. This is a 1.5 second cast spell that incapacitates a target for 6 seconds, making them immune to everything. They can't move, they can't cast, can't take damage, can't take healing. It has no cooldown and can be chained with a total duration of around 10 seconds before DR kicks in, and they'll go immune for 15 seconds. Along with their roots, this makes Druids the kings of control, and they're represented very well in Arena because of that. Lacerate is a new skill, only usable in bear form, and it puts a bleed on your target, stacking up to 5 times. The Feral Druid is an up-and-coming tank in BC, which we'll discuss later. This is one of the reasons why. They also get 2 versions of Flight Form, one trainable and the other awarded after an iconic quest chain. And lastly, for baseline spells, we have Maim for cat form, which is basically a weaker version of Kidney Shot. It disorients the target for a longer duration the more combo points you use. It deals a bit of damage, but also breaks on damage, so it's not as powerful as a stun, but it still gives you control and sets you up for a shred. Balanced Druids only get Force of Nature, which summons 3 treants to attack a target for a short period of time. An issue with Balanced Druids in Classic Vanilla is mana. In fact, you may have heard the term Umkin before. They burn through it incredibly quickly, and this is addressed with the Dream State talent, which increases mana regeneration based on intellect. And they bring some good utility with their improved Fairy Fire, which increases the chance that the target will be hit by both physical and spells by 3%. Feral Druids get Mangle, both for bear and cat form. The bear form deals damage and costs rage, and the cat form costs energy and awards a combo point, and both increase the damage that your target takes from your shred and your bleeds by 30%. Bear form has a 6-second cooldown, whereas cat form has no cooldown. Restoration druids gain Tree of Life, which does several things. It increases healing taken for all party members by 25% of your spirit, but also slows you by 20%, and you can only use the following spells. The mana cost of these spells are also reduced by 20%. And note that this heal isn't tied to just your heals, it's all healing, which makes them extremely important. So balance, due to their increased mana regeneration and damage, is made to be more competitive with other classes. You won't be topping the meters, but they do hold their own, and raids will often bring a balanced druid for their support alone. Feral Druid DPS is tricky because it's completely dependent on the player. It has a complex rotation, implementing power shifting and using niche items such as this level 40 helmet that you get in vanilla. Great Feral Druids can do impressive things, but it requires about 10 times more effort than your average DPS class, and those looking for a high skill cap will love it. Feral tanking, as I've said, really shines in the Burning Crusade. I mean, they can still do fine in Classic for certain fights, but they're much more commonplace in BC, just like all these other specs. They have good single target threat, and when they're not tanking, they can switch out and deal some damage. For example, you have some 3 tank boss fights. Well, if you bring 3 tank spec characters only, it's a wasted slot for the other 2 tank boss fights, unless one of those tanks is feral. And Restoration is great as well, due to that Tree of Life buff and the remove restriction on HOTS. On fights that require movement, heals over time will always shine, and Restoration Druids do well in the Burning Crusade. So overall, the Druid will 100% be the class that sees the biggest increase going from vanilla to BC. One of the least played classes to one of the most played classes surely, as the Jack of all trades, Master of none design turned into a Jack of all trades, pretty damn good at all. Sometimes subtlety is the answer. The next class on our list is the Rogue. Another melee class, they hold a bit more decorum than the aforementioned warrior. One of 2 classes with stealth, they have the advantage of picking their fights, and combined with a wide arsenal of devastating bursty attacks and cooldowns, they can take people out before they even have time to react. Like the Feral Druid, they operate on the energy system, which generates over time, and also the combo point system. Some abilities generate combo points up to a maximum of 5, and other more powerful abilities called finishers consume these combo points for high damage or powerful buffs. You're a dual-wielding class, preferring daggers or maces or swords, coating them with several different poisons that damage and cripple those on the receiving end. They're a very calculated class. Control would be the best word to describe them, and they're just as deadly as their vanilla counterparts. Some would say even more so, in fact. Assassination is a tree that focuses on improving your poisons and burst damage, and highlights the use of daggers, whereas combat is more of a swashbuckling, in-your-face raw damage style. Not as subtle as the other specializations, but it gets the job done. And lastly, subtlety improves your stealth capabilities and gives even more control to a class that's already the master of control. Deadly Throw is a new combo point spender, dealing some light damage at range, and also slowing the target by 50% for 6 seconds. Additionally, we have Envenom, which is another finisher that consumes doses of deadly poison equal to the number of combo points on your target, applying instant poison and dealing some heavy damage. Anesthetic Poison is new. It is basically a weaker version of instant poison that causes no threat. Shiv is an offhand attack that instantly applies poison that's attached to your offhand weapon. A nice way of reducing the RNG from vanilla of poisons just refusing to proc sometimes. And lastly for baseline is the Cloak of Shadows, which has a 90% chance to remove and make you immune to all spell effects for 5 seconds at a 1-minute cooldown, making them even more dangerous to casters. Assassination Rogues get Mutilate, which deals damage with both weapons, awarding 2 combo points and with a damage buff to poison targets. And Subtlety gets Shadow Step, which upon use teleports you behind your enemy, gives you movement speed, increased damage, and reduced threat at a 30-second cooldown. Note that in its BC debut, this is only usable against enemies. Combat remains to be their go-to for PvE, and they do well, competing for top DPS in the later tiers. Especially when they get glaives, of course, but you might have to be a streamer for that one. You may have heard back in the day that certain boss fights required glaive rogues to be able to beat the enrage timers in the final raid, Sunwell. Similar to vanilla, Subtlety is the main PvP spec through the calculated use of cooldowns. It's just now you have Shadow Step on top of it all, which makes it the clear frontrunner for PvP. Many people say that they're the best in PvP, in fact. Again, I don't like using that word too much, but I still wouldn't disagree with it. Search any BC Arena tier list, and you'll find subtlety in the S or A tiers usually. Assassination is sort of middle ground. You can run it for PvE and PvP and it competes, but an issue they run into is Mutilate still requires you to be behind your target in BC, which gives them a strict positional requirement. In an expansion that's already unfriendly to melee, this certainly doesn't help, but it does have its place, just like all of these specializations. Overall, the Rogue will be a very popular choice in Burning Crusade as it is in vanilla, one of the deadliest in PvP due to their control, and they fit with many teams, and still competing for the top in PvE, at least in later tiers. They'll be very prolific throughout the expansion. Put your faith in the light. The Paladin is the cousin of the Warrior. Primarily a melee class, this heavily armored Crusader employs the aid of holy magic to heal allies, exorcise foes, and bolster themselves. They're a support-heavy class, providing a wide variety of buffs called blessings that provide crucial aid to allies, whether it be attack power, mana regeneration, threat reduction, protection spells. In addition to this, they also hold many different auras that are party-wide and changeable on the fly to match whatever situation that they're in. They also operate on the unique seal system. These provide unique augments to the Paladin's attacks, and upon using the Judgment spell are consumed for other unique effects. For example, this one returns mana when the Paladin swings, and if you judge it, it copies that effect to everyone who hits that target. And the same is also true with the Seal of Light counterpart. They're the only class, other than the Druid, that are capable of all three combat roles. The Holy Tree improves the Paladin's healing capability, whereas the Retribution specialization focuses more on offense with buffs and abilities to dish out some divine justice. And Protection, as you would imagine, is the tanking tree, providing a wide variety of defensive buffs and threat generation improvements. This has been the design since the game's inception in vanilla, but many players have been disappointed to learn that it's primarily the Holy Paladin that was in demand. Protection Paladins, unfortunately, suffer from mana issues and a lack of a taunt that stops them from shining in the tank role, and Retribution, simply a lack of damage. Luckily for you though, like all of these other classes, these weaknesses have been addressed, and you have some options. The first being their taunt, which is Righteous Defense. You use this on a player, and up to 3 enemies attacking that target will attack you instead. So it's kind of a roundabout way of doing it, but it is a taunt, which covers up a huge hole in their toolkit from vanilla. Crusader Aura is a party-wide 20% mount speed buff, making Paladins the fastest flyers in the Outland. And Avenging Wrath, now an iconic spell for the class, also makes its debut in the Burning Crusade. In this iteration, it's a straight 30% damage buff, and the downside is that it causes Forbearance, which makes it so you can't bubble yourself for a minute. It's also a magic effect, which makes it susceptible to Dispels and Spellsteal, and trust me, mages are just waiting for you to pop this thing. Spiritual Attunement is a passive that gives them mana back based on healing taken. More designed for tanking here obviously, but it's baseline for every spec, which definitely helps. And interestingly enough, there are also some faction-specific spells for Paladins, and even before release, these are already at the center of some controversy. The Alliance gets Seal of Vengeance, which puts on a stacking dot, with the Judgment dealing holy damage increasing per stack. The Horde, on the other hand, gets Seal of Blood, which causes attacks to deal an additional 35% weapon damage as holy damage at the cost of health, and the Judgment to deal holy damage as well, which also deals some damage to the Paladin. Seal of Blood is universally seen as being the superior skill, thus Horde Paladins superior to Alliance Paladins by extension. Why? Well, for many reasons. It scales better with haste. Haste doesn't affect dots in the Burning Crusades, so more haste for Vengeance just means getting to 5 stacks quicker, so it scales very poorly. Seal of Blood does more damage overall, and the self-inflicted damage is actually a benefit due to that Spiritual Attunement passive, which restores 10% mana on healing taken. This doesn't work with overhealing, it must be actual heals, so the Seal of Blood also gets an edge in mana regeneration, which is important because seal twisting is still a thing in the Burning Crusade. Basically, you time your melee swings with changing seals to get the benefits of both. It's more damage, but taxing on your mana, so it's pretty big. In fact, due to its poor scaling, Alliance Retribution Paladins don't even use Seal of Vengeance, instead of going for the tried and true Seal of Command. This discrepancy is so large, in fact, that some private servers actually share the spell between factions, and people are calling for the same for the official re-release, but it remains to be seen what Blizzard will do. My guess is that they'll keep it faction-specific, just based on how they've handled Vanilla Classic, but we'll see. And for spec-specific abilities, Holy gets Divine Illumination, which is a straightforward 50% mana cost reduction cooldown for the spammy parts of fights. Protection gets Avenger Shield, which covers up another big problem with Vanilla Paladin tanks, that's the fact that they don't have a range spell. Any prot paladin will be familiar with these items, candles, that you farm off of level 5 kobolds because you are simply lacking a ranged ability for pulling in vanilla. This bounces between a few targets and dazes them, and just begs for a macro tied to it, referencing Captain America in some way. And lastly, we have Crusader Strike for Retribution Paladins, an instant cast melee ability that refreshes all judgments. Retribution Paladins are very stagnant in vanilla. Aside from judging, you just sort of auto-attack everything. I always called them the Netflix class. You attack a mob, switch to Netflix, come back, loot, attack a mob, switch to Netflix, and rinse and repeat. So an actual attack adds a ton of agency to their gameplay. It also refreshes all judgments, not just your own. Holy Paladins specialize in tank healing in the Burning Crusade due to their high HPS and efficient mana cost and returns. If you paid attention to their toolkit though, you've noticed that they've gotten 0 AoE heal capability, discounting the Judgment of Light, so they fall short in raid healing. But they're strong in their own ways. Blessings, auras, their ability to free themselves from roots, and even full immunity. Lay on Hands, which still has that 30% armor buff if they're talented for it. They're just more focused on tank healing is all. For PvP, they have their strengths and weaknesses. They have high physical mitigation due to being plate and shield wearers, but a lot of their skills require them to be in the fray, which also puts them at risk, so it kind of evens out there. Also, aside from Holy Shock, their heals are all hard cast, which can also be an issue. Protection Paladins overall probably received the biggest power increase. They garnered the reputation of being the AoE tank in the expansion, and for good reason. With Consecration and that AoE taunt and just a 15-second cooldown, that's pretty much how they were designed. They're amazing for heroics, trash and raids, and even certain bosses and raid tiers as I remember. They didn't have a taunt, so give them a taunt. They run into mana issues, so give them this passive. It's not an end-all solution, but if you're with the Shadow Priest, you're in pretty good shape, and you'll find plenty of Protection Paladins running around in the Burning Crusade. As for Retribution, as described earlier, this is the spec that's most affected by that Seal of Blood issue, so it really depends on your faction. They do well as I remember. Crusader Strike is nice because it refreshes all judgments, not just your own, and they always bring blessings and auras just like any paladin, and you don't feel like you're AFK half the time anymore. In PvP, it's still pretty RNGs, so you'll have mixed results. If you're looking for the ultimate form of paladins, you're gonna have to wait until Wrath where they go Super Saiyan. In BC, they're more in that KO Ken shit, and even though you have an instant attack now, a lot of your damage is fishing for those Seal of Command procs, and your big DPS cooldown is stealable by one of the most represented classes in BC Arena, even putting Dispelling aside. There are comps where they'll do well. I think pairing them with Shamans and Wind Fury is seen as being quite strong, but they're still getting into their rhythm in PvP in the Burning Crusade, at least in my opinion. It doesn't need to be explained further. Paladins received a lot of love in the Burning Crusade. They are often seen as being the most broken in a lot of ways, with most players relegated to Holy, but now all three specializations are a viable option, and there's always a reason to bring them. Winds be at your back. The final class on the list is the Shaman. Professionals in weaving the power of the elements, they provide a diverse toolkit in just about any situation. They operate on the totem system. Through 4 different elements, the Shaman can drop totems that provide critical buffs to themselves and their party members, or debuffs and damage to enemies. Extra melee swings, increased mana regeneration, area of effect slows. They have quite the arsenal at their disposal. Earth, fire, wind, water, and a little bit of heart go a long way. Their prowess in many aspects in the Burning Crusade is unrivaled. Thanks, Kevin. Elemental is the nuker from range. The specialization focuses on improving your spellcasting. Restoration improves upon your healing and support toolkit to keep your allies from harm. And Enhancement, although they still take advantage of their wide variety of spells, is more of a melee DPS-centric tree, preferring a dual-wielding playstyle with quick flurries of burst. This expansion changed shamans forever with the introduction of Bloodlust and Heroism, which increases the attack and casting speed of all party members by 30% for 40 seconds at a 10-minute cooldown. This class-defining ability at the time, like their totems, affected only themselves and their party members, but also had no exhaustion effect tied to it. This spell alone makes them extremely powerful in the raiding scene, and combined with their totems, they remain to be the kings of support. And in PvP, many people are surprised to learn that it works in Arena in BC, which is insane. I think it was Cataclysm they did away with a lot of the long cooldowns in Arena. And what new spells would you get other than totems? The Fire Elemental and Earth Elemental totems make their first appearance. The Fire Elemental dishes out some heavy AoE damage, and Earth is designed for pulling threat and tanking. The Wrath of Air totem is another party buff, which increases spell damage and healing of party members. Water Shield is a new shield that increases mana regeneration and restores mana on hit. Like Lightning Shield, it's only usable on yourself. A nice quality of life spell is Totemic Call, which instantly recalls all totems and refunds a bit of mana. In vanilla, when moving through a dungeon with patrols, shamans always had to be careful of not leaving a stray totem behind to pull something by accident. Now you're clear with a simple click. Elemental shamans get to play with a new totem called Totem of Wrath, which is a 3% crit and hit buff to all spellcaster party members. They also receive a big upgrade in the form of mana regeneration. One of their biggest weaknesses in Classic is that they just burn through mana so quickly, with few ways to regenerate it. Much like Balanced Druids, they get access to a talent that increases their mana regeneration based on their intellect stat. Enhancement gets Shamanistic Rage, which reduces damage taken, and also gives your melee hits a chance to regenerate mana equal to a portion of your attack power. And, unlike the Paladin's Avenging Wrath, this isn't dispellable. They also get Unleashed Rage, which causes your crits to increase the melee attack power of party members by 10%, which is huge. And lastly, Restoration gets Earth Shield, which gives them a chance to ignore spell pushback when hit, and also heals a bit, and unlike the other two shields, this is castable on friendly units. DPS rankings aren't as important as people would lead you to believe, because shamans are great for the crazy amount of buffs and utility that they provide. Having 5 per raid was commonplace. Regardless, all 3 specs do well, depending on the raid tier. I think Enhancement takes a bit of time to ramp up, but the Shaman as a class is always in high demand. Talking PvP here, Shaman of any spec are great since again, Bloodlust and Heroism work in Arena, and you also have Wind Fury Totem, Grounding, and much more great support, so no matter the spec, they have huge value from that alone. Speaking strictly elemental here though, they're still the burst machines as they are in Classic, but due to the resilience stat, as described earlier, it's not as extreme. Their damage is also based off of RNG with their Lightning Overload talent, which is sort of like Wind Fury for spells. In vanilla, their strength was that they were very bursty, but also reliable since that burst came from the Elemental Mastery talent. So this is dampened by resilience and the RNG nature of Lightning Overload. They still do well though, and I expect them to be represented pretty well in BC. As mentioned, this is when Enhancement finally gets their grubby paws off of the rightful Warrior's two-handers and switch to dual wielding, with plenty of talent supporting that. They also bring that nice attack power buff for the melee, so again, the DPS of the Shaman isn't what puts them in demand, it's all of these buffs. In PvP, they're about the same tier as Elemental, benefiting from the same strengths and suffering from the same weaknesses. Bursty, but RNG, so if you go all in for a kill, you better get it. Anyone who's played a Restoration Shaman in Vanilla Classic probably has a bit more wear and tear on their chain heal button. Well, you better get another one, because that's unchanged. Where the Paladin excels at tank healing, the Shaman excels at raid healing, and the chain heal spam becomes their biggest tool, whether it's for dungeons or raiding. Extremely powerful on heals alone, and in addition to the insane support, makes them in many players' eyes, quote, the best healer in BC. In PvP, they bring the same benefits from the Enhancement and Elemental Shaman as far as utility goes. Their Earth Shield, unfortunately though, is dispellable, and unlike Druid and their Life Bloom, there's nothing to dissuade people from cleaning it immediately. This is also before the era of Riptide, so they suffer from that same issue as Paladins, as most of their heals being hard casts, which is fine if you can juke, but it does make you quite stationary and vulnerable. In my Classic video, I said that those looking to make friends should roll Healer, Tank, or Warlock, and that still stands, but for BC, you can safely add Shamans to the list. And no matter the activity, you'll find that people will come to you to party with them, not the other way around. And there you have it. It took about a month to make and a good portion of my sanity, but there's a Burning Crusade class picking guide for you. As mentioned in the beginning of the video, these classes came a long way in the Burning Crusade, and there's no class nor spec that you can deem as useless. Some are weaker than others, and they'll always be a strongest, it's just the nature of MMOs, but gone are the days of the meme specs in PvE. Rotation-wise, it's another story. You still have some that you can play with the garage door opener, let's be honest here, but things are much more competitive compared to vanilla. Just like in my vanilla video, I want to poll everyone on what they're picking. That one has nearly 70,000 votes as of this video, so let's see if we can beat that. Ultimately, the goal wasn't to outright tell you, quote, the best, rather more explaining the capabilities of these classes, what they excel at, where they fall short, and a bit about their playstyle, and hopefully by now you've at least narrowed down your choices. Again, check out the rotations and supplementary videos in the description if you want to see a more in-depth look at certain classes and specs. I hope you enjoyed the video, like it if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.